Day one of the New York Giants mandatory minicamp is in the books. We have some takeaways, plus an update on Saquon Barkley situation. That's coming your way next on the Locked On Giants podcast.
You are Locked On Giants, your daily New York Giants podcast. Part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day.
Hello, New York Giant fans, and welcome to another edition of the Locked On Giants podcast, part of the Locked On Podcast family, your team every day. I'm your host, Patricia Trina, and day one of the New York Giants mandatory minicamp is in the books, and I have a rundown for you now. Unfortunately, the practice itself was pretty much a continuation of the OTAs. I thought maybe they would do a little bit more, a little bit faster tempo. They didn't do that. It was pretty much the same format that we saw the first two OTAs that the media was allowed in. And quite often there was like a line of players blocking the view, so you couldn't really see what was going on the field. But I do have takeaways. We did get the defensive assistant coaches. I have an update for you on Saquon Barkley. That's potentially good news. And I'm just going to run down the list and try to give you, the latest to come from East Rutherford and the New York Giants. So there is a lot to talk about. Let's get started. All right. As I mentioned, the assistant coaches were made available. Today was the defensive assistants. On Wednesday, it's going to be the offensive assistants, and some interesting stuff. So made my way around, and one of the topics I really wanted to find out about was what was the story at slot cornerback. I think, if you've watched my show, if you've read me over on Giants Country, that's a question that I have. Who's going to be the slot cornerback? So I went to Jerome Henderson, the defensive backs coach, and I basically said to him, Coach, what's the story here? Now, I didn't ask him specifically who they were looking at, but my question was more or less, given what opposing offenses tend to do with mixing and matching their slot receivers. Sometimes it's a big tight end. Sometimes it's a smaller, twitchier type of receiver. Sometimes it's a big body receiver. So I asked Henderson if it was practical or something that they would consider as far as, having a rotation or a committee, if you will, playing matchups. Because look, ideally, that's what you want to do in football. You want to be able to play matchups. If you can't play matchups, chances are you're going to struggle. And I think we saw that at times last year with the Giants where they just didn't have enough depth, and therefore they weren't able to play matchups the way I think they wanted to. This year, I think they have more than enough depth, particularly at that slot cornerback position. And Henderson, without agreed with my theory that, look, ideally you want to have somebody who can do everything for you, but if you don't have that one guy, you want to be able to play matchups. So I walked away from that conversation thinking that, as of right now, obviously we've got to see what happens once the pads go on, but as of right now, we will potentially see matchups at that slot cornerback position. And that's an important position, by the way. Darnay Holmes has held it for the last couple of years. It's his job technically to lose, but I've been saying all along, it makes more sense to play matchups. But the Giants haven't been able to do that because they haven't had depth at the position. Now they do. And Henderson mentioned, Bobby McCain can play down in the slot, Xavier McKinney, Jason Pinnock can come down in the slot. Obviously, Cordell Flott, Aaron Robinson, two guys who can also play down there. So they haven't made any decisions yet, with regards to that slot cornerback position. But I think they're leaning more and more towards a committee approach. And if the committee can come together the way maybe they're hoping for, it might just make certain guys with high salary cap numbers expendable. So we'll have to see about that, but certainly something to keep an eye on with regards to the slot cornerback position. All right, I want to quick talk about the culture of the Giants. Now, we hear culture all the time. We hear that word thrown around like crazy. But one of the things that Brian Dable has allowed, and I think it's wonderful, by the way, is he's welcomed in the old guard, if you will. So today at practice, Bill Parcells was there, and he broke down the huddle after practice was over. Michael Strahan was there. Brandon Jacobs was there. And to give you an idea of just how much, they welcome back former players and employees, Avis Roper, one of my favorite people in the whole wide world. He used to be one of the PR guys for the Giants. He was there today. So the Giants having a lot of, former players and coaches there. Carl Banks, of course, showed up as well. Carl's usually there anyway. But, that's important because, look, there are some coaches in this league that they want to erase the history or push the history of a franchise in the background because they believe, look, let's start our own history. Let's not worry about what happened in the past. Let's not live in the past. And I kind of get that, but I also think that's a mistake. When Ben McAdoo was here, he didn't want anything to do with really the history of the team, which I thought was a mistake because sometimes, these guys come in and they have valuable lessons that they can impart on the younger guys. And Parcells, in his message to the team after practice was over, spoke about, being accountable to one another, taking care of one another. And it was a very positive message. I mean, this is a man who led two giant teams to Super Bowl championships. You don't think he doesn't know what he's talking about? So I just thought that was really, a nice little touch. And I'm really glad that Brian Dable is allowing that to come into the building again because, I get the whole thing. You want to make your own history, but sometimes in order to do that, you have to understand the history that came before you. And to totally just ignore it, I think was just a mistake personally. But I'm glad to see, that they feel otherwise about it. So, all right. Who else did we hear from? I spoke to, Andre Patterson, the defensive line coach. We talked about Dexter Lawrence and Leonard Williams. He called them the twins, by the way. It's so funny. I always talk about a Batman and Robin for the pass rushers. I always think of, Azeez Ojulari and Kayvon Thibodeau. And I never thought for a second to think that, Leonard Williams and Dexter Lawrence could be a Batman and Robin as well. But sure enough, they are. And, they play off of each other. And, listen, I was really glad to hear Patterson talk about Dexter and wanting more out of him. I mean, we all know Dexter had a great year last year. He had a breakout season. But Patterson isn't satisfied and Dexter isn't satisfied. So the sky just seems to be the limit. And, we were kind of, one of the topics in the media avails today was, okay, Dex, you got your money now. So, do you have a different swag about you? Well, Dexter's always had a swag. So, that swag could be confidence, but it doesn't mean that Dexter's going to rest on his laurels, from last year and say, okay, look, I've done everything. I got paid. It is what it is. So I was really glad to hear that. And, Patterson, I asked him where Dexter could get better and didn't really get as good of an answer as I would have liked. I did post a video, some video clips over on Giants Country in my minicamp report there, but certainly Dexter knows he can get better and he's going to keep at it. And it's nice to see that Dexter still has his feet on the ground, that he hasn't let the big contract go to his head. So yeah, just a lot of, good stuff from the assistant coaches. Those were a couple of the highlights. If you want to check out Giants Country, I have a whole report. I also posted some of the video clips that I shot, specifically the questions that I asked of the assistant coaches, if you want to check that out. All right, everybody, coming up, I have an update on Saquon Barkley. I think this is a positive update. We'll talk about that in just a moment. But first, Get in on all the sports action with FanDuel, America's #1 sports book, because right now FanDuel is giving new customers a no-sweat first bet up to $2,500 back in bonus bets if their first bet doesn't win. Just go to FanDuel.com/lockedon and sign up today to claim your no-sweat first bet. FanDuel offers great promotions, a safe and secure app to set up your bets, and instant payouts. Make every moment more with FanDuel, the official sports betting partner of the NFL. All right, you've got Patricia Trina here on the Locked On Giants podcast. Just real quick before I get into the Saquon update, tomorrow, mandatory minicamp wraps up. So, in as much as the practice details, the takeaways and big plays and all that stuff, really kind of sparse because, the coaches are kind of mixing and matching different players in different lineups. We're seeing different formations, and I'm going to hold off the detailed stuff for training camp. That's when I think we'll really start to get a clearer picture. But what I am going to do on tomorrow's show is I'm going to do a wrap-up, a spring wrap-up, takeaways from the spring. What did we learn about the New York Giants from all the spring workouts? We also have on Thursday, it's going to be the live show with Trina, Tana, and Dog. I know a lot of you have been asking about that. It is coming back Thursday. I know Tana will definitely be there. Haven't heard yet back from Dog, but I'm hoping he'll be there as well because we got loads to talk about. And then we'll just, head on into the weekend and start the 6-week break before training camp rolls around. So really excited to bring you those programs coming up on the Locked On Giants podcast. And for those of you who were looking for lineups and all that stuff, just real quick, right now, the Giants are mixing and matching. There's really no rhyme or reason because the coaches are experimenting. So I could sit here and I could tell you a lineup. Like, for example, I saw, Nick McLeod was back playing safety again. Does that mean he's going to be the starting safety alongside of Xavier McKinney? No, not necessarily. Just Sean Corbin, running back, got some snaps with the first team offense. Does that mean he's going to, supplant Matt Breida and Saquon when he gets in here and, the other guys that are in front of him on the depth chart? No, it's just the purpose was to see how these guys executed their assignments. That's what Dable was trying to get at. And, he talked about installing everything, that mostly everything's installed and they hope to be able to hit the ground running when they reconvene at the the facility for the start of training camp. So you also have a lot of guys who really haven't been able to do much in terms of practice. Sterling Shepard, for example, went through the walkthrough part, but not really, the part that necessitated running. And Shepard, by the way, did tell reporters that he is optimistic that he should be ready to go by the start of the season. So it doesn't sound like he's going to be ready to go for training camp, but he's aiming for the start of the season. All right. Kind of got off track a little bit there, but let's talk about Saquon because I think there's some positive developments here in the Saquon situation. So I've been of the opinion for the longest time now that unless the Giants may be considered putting back on the table one of the offers that they pulled, that it might be a long shot for something to get done because they would have to start from scratch. And, any progress that they had made just wasn't going to, take place. It wasn't going to advance the situation. Well, according to Ian Rappaport of the NFL Network, the Giants, listen to me, they put back on the table one of the offers that they had pulled for Saquon. And it's believed it's the one that was worth a $14 million APY, which again, APY doesn't matter. It's the guaranteed money, but that's the offer that's believed to be back on the table. Now, in thinking about this and also in talking to a few people, I now have optimism that while this deal will come down to the wire, that come July 17th, which is the deadline, they will get a deal done. So why have I changed my mind on this after saying that my gut feeling was he was going to play on the tag? Again, had some conversations with some people. did some thinking, kind of processed all the information that I gathered. It makes too much sense for Saquon to get the deal done by the 17th. So here's the thing. Why isn't the deal done yet? You might be asking. Excuse me. The deal's not done yet because, as with anything with negotiation, the deadline's not here. And there's always a danger that you don't want to, that you're going to leave stuff on the table if you quote unquote settle or agree too quickly. So I would not be surprised if, from Saquon's perspective, his agent is thinking, look, the Giants have, supposedly this deal back on the table, as if, that rap sheet is claiming to be the case. Why settle and jump on it? You've got time still to talk things through, to maybe see if the Giants will give up a little bit more in the negotiations. So I do believe this will come down to the wire. I definitely believe that. But I think when push comes to shove, this talk about Saquon, sitting out the season, not going to happen. The possibility of him holding out a training camp, if the deal doesn't get done, I'm not so sure that happens now. Because what would be the point? Seriously, what would be the point? Saquon's a guy who apparently cares about his reputation. Once that July 17th deadline passes, that's it. You can't work on a new contract until next year. So what would be the point to sit out? At that point, if you don't have a new deal, you come in and you just pull out. So it just doesn't make sense the more I think about it. But I just, based on what I heard today, some of the conversations I had, I think there's a little bit more optimism that something will get done by the 17th. It's going to come down to the 11th hour, but we'll see. And gosh, wouldn't it be nice if they got something done? Because I don't know about you, but I don't want this to be a distraction all summer long. And it will be a distraction because I could just see it now. The coaches will be asked about it. The players will be asked about it. They were asked about it today, as a matter of fact. How weird is it not having Saquon out there? I mean, it's a topic. So it's the last remaining thing. I do think Saquon wants to be with his teammates. He mentioned respect and everything. Okay, great. But the fact that, again, as Rap Sheet is reporting, that one of the deals is back on the table, that's progress, ladies and gentlemen. And that is what gives me hope that just maybe, this whole saga will have a happy ending. And boy, wouldn't I like to see Saquon come in here and, on a new contract so that they don't have to worry about it and just pull out. Now, I know there are some of you who say, gosh, they shouldn't pay him. What are they thinking? I don't think the Giants will go overboard with him because, look, you look at what Joe Schoen has done with the big contracts that he's already negotiated, Daniel Jones and Dexter Lawrence. Those deals went relatively smoothly. So it's just a Saquon deal that for whatever the reason is getting hung up. And I think it's a matter of, his side wanting a little bit more than maybe what the Giants are willing to give up. But come July 17th, and I think back to what Saquon said at his football camp on Sunday, his youth football camp. He said it's not July 17th yet. So is it wrong for me to assume that maybe that's the date he's got circled and come July 17th, wherever they are with the negotiations, as long as they're relatively close, just take it and don't worry about if you don't get everything you want? I believe that could be the case, folks. And, look, for Saquon's sake and for the Giants' sake, let's hope that is indeed the case. All right, coming up, I have some final thoughts on day one of the mandatory minicamp. Don't go anywhere. All right, Giant fans, welcome back to the Locked On Giants podcast. I'm your host, Patricia Trina. and day one of the New York Giants mandatory minicamp in the books. Again, a teaching camp, a passing camp, not a whole lot that I can report back to you with guarding plays. I mean, if you want little takeaways, Bobby McCain, I think, had the best practice out of all the defensive players. He had I think 2 picks and 1 pass breakup. There were a bunch of, touchdown passes thrown between Daniel Jones and Tyrod Taylor, as the Giants worked on basically red zone stuff, the short stuff. But really, guys and gals, once the pads go on, that's when we're going to really get to the nitty gritty. So, if you're looking for play by play and stuff, not there yet, but it's coming. I promise you, it's coming. I'll have the notes and all that stuff going. Right now, it's all about how things are taking shape. And speaking of which, I know some people ask about the lineups. Well, who's on the first team offensive line? Who's on the first team defensive line? Who's playing linebacker and all this stuff? Folks, it doesn't mean anything right now. It really doesn't, because it doesn't tell you how they're going to line up come the summertime. Again, what the coaching staff is doing, they are trying different players with different units to see who has gotten the assignments down and who is executing within the scope of the tempo being set at the practice. So, for example, John Michael Schmitz was at center for most of the snaps, but Ben Bredesen got a few snaps at center too. So does that mean, oh my God, there's a competition there? Probably not. It's to see how they look at, because look, you can't just go in and say, okay, John Michael Schmitz is our center. That's it. We're not playing anybody there. Because what if, God forbid, John Michael Schmitz gets injured and now you've got to plug in Ben Bredesen? Don't you want to have that communication on the field, have them practice that as well? So that's why, when you read about lineups, and I know some people tweet that out and everything, it doesn't mean anything. Not yet, at any rate. Now, that being said, watching what I could see when I didn't have a wall of players in front of me, blocking my vision, there were some creative looks there. I saw, guys doing stuff like, one thing, for example, that they were trying out, they had Paris Campbell in the backfield, and he ran a jet sweep. So, there's some creativity there that they are trying out. Now, just because they're trying it out now doesn't mean it's going to necessarily make it into the summer and then into the playbook. So, springtime is a time to experiment. It's a teaching camp, a learning camp. The coaches are learning about, more about the players. And, I want to give credit to Ed Valentine, because he asked a really good question of Brian Dable. I thought it was a good question today about, how do you balance the concept of sticking with what worked with you last year versus introducing new plays to maybe accommodate some of the players that, the new talent you have. Because look, how many times have coaches said to us, next man up, interchangeable, blah, blah, blah. No, sorry. Talent is not interchangeable. I mean, we're humans. We're not robots. And the coaches will have us believe that, if Darren Waller goes down, Daniel Bellinger can do the exact same thing. Doesn't work that way. And that's not a slight against Daniel Bellinger. That's just a fact, because he's not a clone of Darren Waller, just like Darren Waller is not a clone of Daniel Bellinger. So, you look at these different creative alignments that the coaches are putting together. And there's a lot to be excited about, I think, because if this stuff carries through, it's going to look beautiful. And getting back to Ed's question to Brian Dable, Dable said, yeah, that's a tough question, but that's what the spring's all about. So, that's why they are experimenting. That's why they're looking at different formations, asking guys to do things that maybe they haven't done in the past. Think back to last year when they were having Dexter Lawrence line up at nose tackle. And some of us were saying, oh, wow, that's a change. Dexter's lining up at nose tackle. And how did that work out for him? Pretty good, as I recall. So, that's what it's all about. And, I know, again, a lot of you are like, oh, we got to, give us more details and stuff. But really, folks, once the pads come on, that's where it's going to be interesting. Now, I will say this. I thought that they would up the tempo a little bit in this practice. They didn't. They kept it the same as they did for the OTAs. And that's fine. I thought it was interesting how Dable continued with the 11 on 11. The players work without their helmets and literally, again, walk through the formations rather than run them. They walk through the plays. So I think that's good because come training camp, you want them to hit the ground running. Some of these guys are going to take time off, get away from football. I know I'm going to take a few days off here and there. But when you come back, you want to be able to hit the ground running because you don't have a whole lot of time to waste. There is the acclimation period before the pads, but, this team, big things are expected. They've upgraded the talent. As I mentioned before, they're better off now because they can play matchups as opposed to being forced to stick with one option. I think they're going to be that much better. I really do. And just, again, things are just, I feel good about where this team is headed. Now, it's only, June. They're in shorts and T-shirts and whatnot. So the real test is still to come. But Giant fans, I feel pretty good about where this team is headed. But we will see, obviously, once everything comes to fruition and everything, we get into the pads and the hitting and all that stuff. But I'll be bringing it all to you. I can't wait. So on that note, that's going to do it for today's episode of Locked On Giants. And again, tomorrow I'm going to have a spring wrap up. On Thursday's the live show. Later on in the week, I'm going to have Gene Clemens on, Coach Gene Clemens. We're going to start previewing for training camp. And next week, I hope to have on Emery Hunt. I've got 3 questions and stuff that Emery Hunt had to say. And we were talking about it today, actually. And I said, Emery, I got to have you on the show because you said some stuff on Twitter. I said, you got to explain this to me. And he did. And the more I heard, I was like, okay, now you got to explain it to my listeners. So Emery's going to be on the show as well. And I'm going to see if I could get Ed Valentine back on the show. He was supposed to be on the show with me earlier in the week, couldn't make it because of a scheduling conflict. So hopefully that'll be coming up. So thank you, everybody, for tuning in to the Locked On Giants podcast. Thank you for being patient with me while I took care of everything before I could get to re-recording this. I hope you enjoyed the program, and I will see you guys tomorrow.